Hi, welcome to another edition of Mr. and MS. I'm the Mr. and I have MS. Today I thought we'd look at MS and work. It's a real difficult subject in the UK because there's a huge amount of effort and energy being spent on helping disabled people to remain in or to find work. And there's still much more work to be done, in my opinion, in that regard, to help support disabled people in finding the right job opportunity, but also helping them to stay in that opportunity, that job, once they've identified it, despite their condition. And there are laws that protect disabled people at work, and we'll touch on those a little bit later on, but there's also a huge amount for you as a disabled person and as an MS sufferer to be aware of, and also some things that I think will help you in evaluating whether and how much you want to keep on working in line with the condition that you have. So let's start at the top, on the assumption that you've got a job. Brilliant. The rates of employment for disabled people in the UK are pretty disheartening. I think the most recent numbers that I could come across from the Department of Work and Pensions say that only 46% of disabled people are actually in employment, compared to about 76% of the general population. That's disheartening. Well, with those levels of unemployment amongst disabled people, meaning that you're probably more likely to be out of work than in work if you're disabled, compared to non-disabled people, there's a huge emphasis being placed on engaging with and supporting disabled people back into work. And that work has to be commended. I think there's difficulty in some aspects of how we get employers to properly engage with that. But if at the moment you're fortunate enough to be in work, the issue that you've got to deal with is, when do you tell your employer that you have MS? Now, there are some general rules around how you can do this and when you should do this, but it's entirely up to you. You're not under any legal obligation, in general terms, to tell your employer that you're a disabled person. But if you have a job that is dangerous, that you work at height, and you may come into contact with heat or cold, and that these things may trigger off relapses or may cause problems with your ability to perform your job, then you should speak to your employer about any concerns that you may have. You've got some protection in the UK under the Equality Act, and it's important that you've at least read the Equality Act in relation to disability, just so that you know what your obligations are, what the employer's obligations are, and what the rights are, and your statutory rights that are protected, and of course your options if you feel that they are being breached by conduct from your employer. So have a look at that. I think once you've sat down and spoke to your employer, you have a meeting, you tell them quite honestly what the circumstances are. They then have to think about whether any reasonable adjustments are necessary. So you can say to them, look, you're still able to work and function normally, but you might not be able to. You might say that in the mornings, for instance, it's terribly difficult for you to get going. You'd like to start later. Perhaps you'd like to do some homework. Perhaps you'd not like to work away from home. These are all adjustments, reasonable adjustments, that your employer has to consider. And if they're not going to be able to make these adjustments, they have to give you a very good reason why those adjustments could not be considered or put into place. Because obviously, if they simply knock them out of hand and say no, then that in itself may bring a claim for discrimination. and most employers would not want to have to go to a tribunal and answer questions about their conduct. So, on the assumption that you've spoken to your employer, you've told them about adjustments that you think might be necessary, they may refer you to occupational health. They may ask you for some more information under the Access to Medical Reports Act, and you have to comply with that, or at least you should. You don't have to give them unfettered access to your medical records, and you get to see what your doctor or consultant is going to say before he or she sends the report through to your employer. And of course you have the option to redact or take out parts of the report that you don't think are relevant. But it's important that you make sure that you get the report sent through if you're asked for it, and you can agree to it. Then your employer can think about what else they might need to do to help you. So, let's say you're not in work. If you're not in work and you're looking for employment, it's hard. It is going to be hard. You've got a 30% less chance of being employed, being a disabled person. So, the first thing you've got to do is figure out what type of work it is you are able to do. And if you're engaged with your local job centre, they may be able to help and assist you with thinking about courses, thinking about the type of work you can do. Once you define the type of work that you can do, you then need to think about how do you engage with the jobs market. You need a CV. You need to make sure that you get that looked over by a professional, somebody that can give you some help and advice, and certainly speak to the job centre to help you. Make sure that the CV obviously doesn't have any spelling mistakes. You don't need to say, hey, I'm a disabled person. But when you get to interview, as part of the interview process, the potential employer may ask you questions about your condition, but they can only ask you on very narrow grounds, in fairness. So they can certainly get you to fill in a questionnaire that asks you if you're a disabled person under the Equality Act 2010 or Disability Discrimination Act. You have to answer these questions truthfully. It's really important. If you don't, that could create problems for you down the line. But they can't seek to ask you questions about your disability, really to try and take you out of the running for the job. Once you've been offered the job, yes, you've got to do a medical, yes, you've got to be honest, but if they're asking you questions about your capability at work, the key thing to remember about all of this, it is about your skills. It's not about the fact that you're a disabled person. There are loads of sites online, lots of resources to help you about planning for an interview, about preparing a CV, about the type of questions that you're going to be asked at interview. And I cannot stress to you how important as a disabled person it is for you to make sure you are prepared, ready, you've considered some of the questions you're going to be asked, and that you have the answers. Listen, even if you weren't a disabled person, I would say you have to be prepared. But automatically, as a disabled person, you have to be super prepared because you're already 30 percentage points behind an able-bodied person in the likelihood of being employed. So I cannot say to you enough how much and how important it is to prepare for an interview. Lots of sources, lots of available information online, lots of details that you should be able to get through either a recruitment agency or from going to the MS Society, MS Trust, Shift MS, to help you prepare for that interview and make sure that you've got, well, I would say in the UK, all your ducks in a row, because this could be the start of a great career for you, or the resumption of a great career for you. And working does wonders, not just for you financially, but also mentally. Well, that's the issue about staying in work and being in work But what about if you think you need to start thinking about reducing your work or giving up work altogether? I still work. There are some days I wish I didn't, but I still do, but that's no different to being a non-disabled person. But if you're finding that the reasonable adjustments that have been put in place, the changes that you've made, are making it just too difficult for you to continue to function and to exist within a working environment, you might need to start thinking about giving up employment altogether. If you're going to do that, once you've done the maths, you've thought about it, you discussed it with your family, you've got your head straight, and I say get your head straight, you've got to think about what you're going to do when you give up work. MS is a cruel condition. It strikes people sometimes in their 20s, early 30s, 40s, but it can be just at the time that you're just starting to put down the building blocks of your life. You might be thinking about buying a home, you might have just bought a home, you might have just had kids, you might be trying to have kids. Any of these things could have happened and you can be struck with this condition. One of the things you've got to think about is, if I give up work, what am I going to do? Because I found, and one of the things that keeps me going is that I know my brain, my mind is still functioning normally. My body might be failing me, but I still believe I have a lot to offer a potential employer and to my current employer. So you've got to think to yourself, if you're going to give up work and take yourself out of that grind from 9 to 5 or 10 to 4 or 3.5 days a week or whatever it is that you work, what are you going to do with that time? I would strongly suggest that you think about volunteering, you think about getting some other activities that are going to get you out of the front door and get you to do something. If you end up being trapped indoors, doing nothing, having what I call no purpose, all that will do is to make you sad, make you depressed, make you grumpy, make you feel as though you are not contributing. And when you start getting on the path of believing all of those negative thoughts, it can become super destructive. When you link that to the issues around mental health problems with multiple sclerosis, if you set your life up to absolutely undermine your existence, you will find that that is exactly what will happen. So it's important for you to have a plan, a secondary option to help you, to keep you busy, to allow you to keep yourself occupied. Okay, that is another episode of Mr. and MS. Please send me a message. If you're happy with what you've seen, give me a big thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. I will be putting up new videos every week and we'll be discussing a huge range of topics. It's been great talking to you. Thank you once again. Whatever you're doing, please take care. God bless you and see you again soon for Mr. and MS. Goodbye.